This video is about review for quiz 1, cycle 2 inverse trig function. Find the exact value. First of all, you have this diagram ready. For number 1, since domain here is a -1/2, we go to QRS. Do the backwards. Sign is negative. Reference angle, that's a pi/6. Because sine pi/6 equals 1/2. Then they go to fourth quadrant. Pattern will be -pi/n. That's why your solution will be -pi/6. For number 2, still we go to QRS. Sine is a negative. Reference angle is pi/3. Because cosine pi/3 equals 1/2. We go to second quadrant. The pattern for second quadrant is n-1 pi/n. So we got 2 pi/3. So answer will be 2 pi/3. Remember, we do the backwards. For number 3, still that's QRS backwards. We got negative sign. Reference angle is pi/4. Go to fourth quadrant. Pattern will be -pi/n. Therefore, answer will be -pi/4. For number 4, since the domain of this inverse is positive, therefore, reference angle will be the answer, pi/2. For number 5, we still go to QRS. Backwards. And we know that's negative sign. Reference angle will be 0. They go to the second quadrant. Because this is the inverse cosine. Therefore, answer is pi. For number 6, this is a positive, means reference angle. That's pi/3. Let's go to number 7. Number 7, inside that's a inverse trig function. Square root of 3/2, that's positive, which means this one will be reference angle. So we got pi/3. Then we're working on cosine pi/3. We use left-hand tricks. We got 1/2. For number 8, we need to go to QRS backwards first, because we need to working on 1 and 2. So for number 1, we got this is negative. Reference angle is pi/6. Go to second quadrant. Pattern will be this one. Therefore, we got 5 pi/6 will be the solution. Then second step, we need to go to tangent 5 pi/6. QRS. 5 pi/6, that's the second quadrant. You can carry on from here. Reference angle definitely is pi/6. Second quadrant, we are looking for tangent. The sign will be negative. Tangent pi/6 means negative square root of 3/3. This is the final solution for number 8. Let's go to number 9. Do inside. That's the first step, then do second step. Look at the first step. We need to do QRS backwards. Since domain here is a negative, reference angle is pi over 6. We go to fourth quadrant, and pattern will be negative pi over 6. Now we need to figure out cosine negative pi over 6. Working on QRS. Quadrant 4. Reference angle pi over 6. Cosine in the fourth quadrant, that's a positive. So we got the positive cosine pi over 6. That's square root of 3 over 2. So answer will be square root of 3 over 2. Now let's go to number 10. We can count this 0 as a positive. So we got the reference angle for inverse cosine of 0, that's pi over 2. Sine pi over 2, use left-hand tricks, that's 1. For number 11, first step and a second step. For the first step, tangent 7 pi over 4. We got to go to QRS. Fourth quadrant. And the reference angle is pi over 4. For tangent, go to fourth quadrant. Use all students take calculus. We know that it's a negative tangent pi over 4 equals negative 1. So we're working on inverse cosine negative 1. We already know that it's a pi, because when you go to QRS backwards, negative, reference angle is 0. Go to second quadrant, therefore answer is pi. Because for second quadrant, only pi whose reference angle is 0. Now go to number 12. First step, second step. For first step, we have QRS. 7 pi over 6, that's the third quadrant. Reference angle is pi over 6. Cosine in the third quadrant, that's negative. Cosine pi over 6. So we got negative square root of 3 over 2. Then we're working on the second step, working on inverse cosine negative square root of 3 over 2. We go to QRS, but this time backwards. Domain of this inverse sine is negative. Reference angle. Since sine pi over 3 equals square root of 3 over 2. So pi over 3 is the reference angle. Then we go to fourth quadrant. Pattern will be negative pi over n. Therefore, answer is negative pi over 3. Now let's go to number 13. For number 13, first step, second step. So for the first step, we go to QRS. 5 pi over 6, that is the second quadrant. How to decide the quadrant? This is the pattern. So we have 6 minus 1 pi over 6. Let's go to second quadrant. Reference angle pi over 6. For second quadrant tangent, using all students take calculus, we know that's a negative. So we got negative tangent pi over 6 means negative square root of 3 over 3. Now we go to second step, working on inverse tangent of negative square root of 3 over 3. We do QRS backwards because angle will be the expected value. We got domain, here's a negative, reference angle pi over 6. And a quadrant, go to inverse, that's a fourth quadrant. Pattern will be negative pi over n means negative pi over 6. So negative pi over 6 will be the answer. Now let's go to number 14. This is the first step, second step. For cosine 2 pi over 3, we go to QRS. Second quadrant, reference angle is pi over 3. It will be negative because for second quadrant, cosine is negative. Using all students take calculus, we got negative cosine pi over 3 equals negative 1 over 2. Then we're working on inverse sine of negative 1 over 2. Go to QRS. Backwards. Domain for this inverse sine, that's a negative. Reference angle, since sine pi over 6 equals 1 over 2, then pi over 6 will be reference angle. Go to fourth quadrant. Pattern will be negative pi over n, that means negative pi over 6 will be the solution. Now let's go to number 15. First of all, we use the inverse cosine of negative 5 over 7 to figure out the quadrant. That's a second quadrant. Because of this, the coordinate will be negative x, positive y. We assume this is a theta, so we are supposed to get the two pieces of information. First one is cosine theta equals negative 5 over 7. And we are looking for sine theta. So we label cosine theta equals negative 5 over 7, which means x over r. Then we figure out x equals negative 5, r equals 7. Then we're looking for y. Y will be positive square root 7 square minus negative 5 square. We got square root of 24. For square root of 24, I can simplify 4 times 6. So 2 square root of 6. That's 2 square root of 6. Therefore, for sine theta, it will be y over r, means 2 square root of 6 over 7. This will be the answer. You can check for second quadrant, sine will be positive. That means this good. Now let's go to 16. For 16, inverse tangent of negative square root of 5 over 9. Let's go to fourth quadrant. Coordinate will be positive x, negative y. So we assume this is a theta. Then got the two pieces of information. First of all, tangent theta equals negative square root of 5 over 9. Then we're looking for cosine theta equals what? We can label for tangent theta, that's y over x. We got the x equals 9 and y equals negative square root of 5. Check this one. Yeah, that's correct. So for r equals 9 squared plus negative square root of 5 squared. 9 squared is 81. Negative square root of 5 squared, that's 5. So we got square root of 86. Since 86 cannot be divided by 4, 9, 25, 49. So this is a simplified. Therefore, for cosine theta, that's x over r. You got the 9 over square root of 86. Simplify, you got square root of 86 over 86. Carry on this 9. This will be the final answer for number 16. Let's go to number 17. For inverse sine of negative 5 square root of 2 over 8, this is the fourth quadrant. Coordinate will be positive x, negative y. I assume this theta. So we got sine theta equals negative 5 square root of 2 over 8. Then we're looking for tangent theta equals what? For sine theta, that's y over r. So we got y equals negative 5 square root of 2, r equals 8. We need to figure out that x. It will be positive because this is positive x. 8 squared minus negative 5 square root of 2 squared. This will be 64. 8 squared is 64. Negative 5 squared, that's 25, times square root of 2 squared is 2. So we got the 50. 64 minus 50, that's square root of 14. So for tangent theta, that's y over x. You got negative 5 square root of 2 over square root of 14. Reduce. This is 1, here's a 7. Therefore, we got negative 5 over square root of 7. Simplify. We got negative 5 square root of 7 over 7. This will be the final solution for number 17. For question 18 to 27, decide the statement is true or false. Basically, you only need to check outside this trig or inverse trig function, that's a range. Here is the information for range of trig function or inverse trig function. For number 18, we know range for inverse sine is negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. We know 2 pi over 3 is not in this range. Therefore, this is false. For number 19, range for inverse tangent, that is negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. And 5 pi over 6, let's go to second quadrant. It's not in this range. Therefore, this is a false. For number 20, range for cosine x, that is negative 1 to 1. Negative 3 over 2 is not in this range. So, false again. For number 21, inverse cosine, that is range will be from 0 to pi. 3 pi over 4, let's go to second quadrant. Yeah, this is true. Which means 3 pi over 4 is in this range. Number 22, range for inverse sine, that's negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. Pi over 3 is in this range. So we do, this is true. For number 23, inverse cosine range will be from 0 to pi. And negative 3 pi over 4 is not in this range. So this is a false. For number tangent, since the range of tangent, that's all real numbers. So this is true. For number 25, inverse tangent range will be negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. And a negative pi over 3 is in this range. So we do the true. For number 26, inverse sine, that range will be negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. 4 pi over 3 is not in this range. Therefore, this is false. 27, range for cosine, that's negative 1 to 1. And negative 1 over 5 is in this range. So this is true.